our host today is Dr. Nick Maurice, who qualified as a general practitioner and has been based here for many years. In fact, they have had a family medical practice here for 4 or 5 generations in the same town, and his great-grandfather was a doctor here. And he is an amazing friend of India in many ways. In fact, he is a friend of diverse cultures from all parts of the world. He's done a lot of work in Africa as well. And he set up a charity called Build, which is specializing in building links with between charities and diaspora communities in Britain. So he is somebody who is already quite sold on to the whole project of diversity. Nick, the aim of the Masala Tool is to bring the wisdom of India to the attention of wider Britain. Now you are key to that, partly because you're already working in that area, but partly also because you share the same concerns. So can you suggest to us what you think is the message of India in Britain and how that can be taken to the powerful and the elite?
Wow, that's a big question, Atul, that you've asked me. I suppose in the 67 years of my life I've seen a lot of change in our society, and I think change for the good in lots of ways. We are a considerably more diverse society now than we were 67 years ago. I go to London every week, and I'm sitting on the tube and I'm hearing Gujarati in one ear, I'm hearing Swahili in the other ear, I'm hearing Polish in the other ear as I sit on the tube. And I recognize that we are a very excitingly diverse society here in the UK. But at the same time, as here in Marlborough, there are pockets where you would not see much in the way of diversity. And I think it's important that the society as a whole understands, welcomes that diversity and recognizes the richness that it brings to our society. My organisation BUILD, which stands for Building Understanding Through International Links for Development, is about trying to create a culture where nobody in this country can escape life without at some point being touched by a partnership with a community in another part of the world. Whether that's through their school, whether it's through their local authority, their hospital, their town like Marlborough, whether it's through their football club, their orchestra, their band, their faith group, whatever it is. How can we develop partnerships with counterparts, particularly in the global south, in Asia, in Latin America, in Africa, in the Caribbean, so that people here not only get an understanding of the global context in which they're living, but also understand the national context in which they're living, so that when they bump into a Malawian in the hospital in which they're working, when they bump into an Indian in the school in which they're working, they can say, I embrace you, brother and sister. I know about the culture and your communities back at home because I have a partnership with your community. When I was at school, my school was linked to a school in Gujarat, and therefore I understand where you're coming from. I understand something about your faith. I understand something about your culture. And I think that in terms of peace, prosperity and justice, these partnerships can be very, very important.
But Nick, the world also lives in Britain, don't forget, right? The world actually has created some kind of, you could say some of these communities have created their own hubs in Britain where their culture is very much alive, very vibrant, as we have seen during the Masala Tool when we visited community centers and temples across the land. And actually, but at the same time, we feel that maybe where there is engagement with these communities, if there is, it's quite superficial, that they don't necessarily need to travel. People don't need to leave the UK to encounter the world. They can encounter the world right here, but do it in a more authentic way and do it in a deeper way so that they actually understand the world from the the immigrant to this country, from the perspective of the immigrant and their culture, because that's of course much easier to do than to travel to another country.
Well, I would argue against that, and I would actually say that it is easier. It is easier for me, as we have done here in Marlborough, when 30 years ago we set up a link with a Muslim community in the Gambia. In a way, it is easier and kind of safer for me to go to the Gambia and live in that community, as I have done on 42 occasions now in the last 30 years, to live in that community and embrace my brothers and sisters there, and I really mean brothers and sisters. I know people there extremely well. It's easier and safer for me to do that than almost to knock on the door of my neighbour and say, I want to be your friend. In a sense, how can I put it? But let me just go on to say that in doing that, that gives me the opportunity to create relationships with my neighbours who come from the Gambia, who live in Bristol 40 miles away, and if you like, it's going through the back door to do that, but it's quite difficult, and you must have experienced this yourself. It is quite difficult to make that very direct communication unless you're doing it in the context of the work you are doing, to really get to know neighbours. Maybe that says something about us as Anglo-Saxons and as our culture. Maybe it's saying a lot about that. Maybe it's saying something about me personally, but I don't think it is. I think it is easier. And in some ways one can gain so much more from not only seeing making relationships with people in other places, but understanding the environment in which they're living.
So what you're really saying is people need to not paddle, but they actually need to dive in deep. And in a way, they can't dive in deep by meeting an immigrant in this country or going to their temple or their mosque, but they can do it by actually going to their home country and engaging with that. And maybe the immigrant that is living in this country is the window of to the home country, so they can provide some advice and some information, but really they need to go dive deep into the culture.
I think that's right. And I mean, just to pick up on one thing that you said about, in a sense, using the immigrant to our society, for us to do that diving in deep. As you know, Build is involved in a project at the moment called Building on the UK diaspora for international development. And what we're saying there is, look, you come originally from India. You are going backwards and forwards to visit your family, to go back to your community, to go back to your roots. Is there some way in which you could introduce me as a resident of this country? Is there some way in which you could introduce me to your home so that I can learn from the wider world, that I can go and immerse myself in your home, understand, and become a richer person as a result? That's really what I'm saying. So what we're hoping out of this particular project that we're involved in is that whether it's a Malawian nurse who is working in an NHS hospital, whether it's an Indian doctor who is working in a GP practice, whether it's a Zimbabwean who's working for the local authority, is there some way in which we can use those people to build partnerships between the local hospital here and the hospital in Malawi, or the school here and the school in India, or the local authority here and the local authority in Zimbabwe? Because I think by giving people that extra global dimension to their lives, it enriches them far beyond anything that they can witness locally. And in terms of their own professional development, in terms of what they can give, sure, there may be things that they will be able to give to other societies, other cultures, people in other parts of the world. But at the same time they will receive a huge amount, which I'm not sure that they would receive to the same extent if they were living here.
So in terms of the wisdom of India and that percolating into British education and public and social policy, are you saying that actually at the moment the thinking in Britain is not even in that direction, that they don't realize the wisdom that is in these cultures and how that wisdom can relate to their pressing problems, and instead they're too busy trying to, if you like, continue the same policies or maybe tinker at the edges rather than do a wholesale transformation in the attitude towards communities, towards faith, etc. Is that what you say?
I think I'm sure that's true.
Yeah.
And I think the responsibility for that lies on both sides. It lies certainly on our side in the sense that we need to be listening to what the immigrant population has to offer us, and I think it is enormous what it has to offer us. And almost, I would argue, by definition, people who are immigrants, people who are refugees and asylum seekers, or people who've decided to come here to build a new life in this country, almost by definition they are going to be special people, because they have uprooted themselves, maybe because of conflict, maybe because of economic circumstances, maybe because of political circumstances in the country from which they've come. And to uproot yourself and go and make a life in another part of the world says something about that human being. So by definition, I think people coming from different cultures, whether it's from India, Africa, Asia, wherever it may be, those people will almost certainly have something very rich to offer our society, and we need to be listening. But again, perhaps by definition, and I tread carefully here, perhaps by definition, you as immigrants are cautious before you raise your heads above the parapet and say, we actually have something really special to offer you. Maybe to a certain extent, because in a sense the relationship is, we have welcomed you into our society, therefore you, if you like, are the beneficiaries, therefore you need to be a bit cautious before you say, actually we've got more to offer you than you think. It's not just the fact that I'm a doctor working in a hospital in Sheffield. I actually have got my culture to offer you as well as my expertise as a doctor. I've got my culture. Maybe you're a bit cautious about doing that. And I would say, and I understand that caution, very much I understand that caution, but at the same time, if you really are going to immerse yourself in our society, I think I would also say, you've got to live in this society, you've got to be political animals if you want to bring about change, and my goodness, we need some change in our society. If you really are going to bring about change, then maybe you've got to grab the politics of the place by the neck and say, I'm going to stand as a member of Parliament, take that as an example. I'm going to stand for the local council. I'm going to stand as a trustee of a local organisation. I'm going to stand as a member of Parliament and bring about those changes.
Or set up a think tank.
Or set up a think tank, absolutely. Yes, absolutely.